You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. Monetarism is an economic philosophy that emphasizes the importance of how much control policymakers have over the amount of money circulating in an economy. It became quite popular in the 1970s, but started to lose its direct influence on monetary policymaking in the following decade. This shift happened as central banks began focusing on controlling inflation by adjusting interest rates. According to monetarism, changes in the amount of money available can significantly impact the economy's output in the short term and influence prices in the long run. Monetarists believe that the goals of monetary policy are best achieved by focusing on managing the growth of the money supply rather than by making frequent adjustments to monetary policies. Monetarism is often linked with neoliberal economic policies. A key figure behind monetarism is Milton Friedman, who challenged the Keynesian approach of using government spending to tackle economic slowdowns. Together with Anna Schwartz, Friedman wrote A Monetary History of the United States, 1867 to 1960, where they made the case that inflation is essentially a result of how much money is in the system. Although Friedman was not in favor of having the Federal Reserve, he did suggest that if it has to exist, it should aim to align the growth of the money supply with the overall growth in demand for goods and productivity. Despite this, the approach to target money growth directly was eventually dropped by central banks after finding the connection between money supply growth and inflation wasn't as close as expected. From the early 1990s, most of the major central banks shifted their strategy to focus on directly targeting inflation by adjusting interest rates. This marked a move away from monetarism towards what's known as the new neoclassical synthesis in macroeconomics by around the year 2000. Monetarism is an economic concept that focuses on how the amount of money circulating in an economy and the role of central banks influence the larger economic scenario. Created by Milton Friedman, the essential idea is that if there is too much money in circulation, it will result in inflation. Therefore, the primary responsibility of those managing the money supply should be to maintain stable prices. This theory is not entirely new. It is actually based on the quantity theory of money. This older economic principle suggests that the amount of money within an economy determines its purchasing power and overall economic health. Several economists, such as Irving Fisher and Alfred Marshall, experimented with this idea before Friedman added his unique perspective in 1956. Monetarists, led by thinkers like Friedman, have pointed fingers at central banks for major unexpected ups and downs in the money supply. Friedman had a particular stance. He believed that when central banks actively try to keep the economy stable by tweaking monetary policies, it can backfire in ways they didn't intend. This insight comes from deep dives into monetary policy history, especially highlighted in the book A Monetary History of the United States, 1867 to 1960, which Friedman wrote with Anna Schwartz in 1963. This book put the blame for inflation squarely on too much money being pumped out by central banks. On the flip side, when central banks didn't step up the money supply during tough times, it led to deflationary spirals, where prices and values keep dropping. A key argument they made was about the Great Depression of the 1930s. They believed it wasn't caused by a lack of investment, as Keynes suggested, but by a significant drop in the money supply, a period they famously called the Great Contraction. The authors also looked at post-war inflation, claiming it was due to the money supply growing too fast. Their discussions helped cement the monetarist viewpoint that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, a quote that's become quite famous in economic circles. Milton Friedman introduced a concept known as Friedman's K% rule. This strategy suggests that the amount of money circulating in an economy should automatically grow by a specific percentage annually. This increase should match the real gross domestic product growth rate to keep overall prices stable. To put this into context, imagine the economy is projected to grow by 2% in a particular year. According to Friedman, the Federal Reserve, or the Fed, should then boost the money supply by 2% as well. Friedman believed in sticking to this fixed rule rather than adjusting monetary policy on a case-by-case basis. He argued that making policy decisions on the fly could be just as likely to disturb the economy as to help stabilize it. Therefore, he pushed for the Fed's actions to follow predefined guidelines. Most experts who focus on the economic study of money, known as monetarists, do not support the idea of basing the value of money on gold. Milton Friedman, a well-known economist, thought that using gold to back the value of money was simply not practical. He explained that while having gold limit the amount of money could help prevent the general increase in prices or inflation, there is a downside. If the population grows or trade increases faster than the amount of money backed by gold, there is no easy way to add more money into the economy. This could lead to deflation, where prices drop and the economy slows down unless more gold is found. However, Friedman also mentioned that an economy based on gold could work if the government was willing to relinquish control over its money supply and refrain from interfering in the economy. Clark Warburton is often recognized as the pioneer who laid down the foundation for monetarism through his detailed analysis on how money influences business ups and downs, starting with his research in 1945. Monetarism really took off with Milton Friedman in 1956, when he brought a new angle to the quantity theory of money. Friedman introduced the idea that people's demand for money is based on a few key economic factors. What he meant was this: when the amount of money available increases, people wouldn't just hold on to the additional cash without using it. If they were content with the amount of money they had before the increase, any additional money would be seen as excess and would likely be spent, boosting overall demand. Conversely, if there was less money available, people would reduce their spending to rebuild their cash reserve. Friedman's thoughts contrasted with a simplified view usually credited to Keynes, which suggested that the role of money was negligible. Hence, the term monetarist came into use. Monetarism began to gain traction in political debate, especially when the established Keynesian approach could not clearly address the simultaneous issues of increasing unemployment and inflation that arose after economic upheavals in the early 1970s, such as the Nixon shock and the oil crises. This scenario presented a dilemma. Rising unemployment suggested a need for more inflationary policy, while climbing inflation indicated a need to slow things down. This paradox challenged the established post-war economic consensus in developed countries, paving the way for the rise of neoliberal viewpoint. In 1979, President Jimmy Carter of the United States appointed Paul Volcker as the head of the Federal Reserve. Volcker focused first and foremost on combating inflation. He approached this by restricting the availability of money in the economy, a policy motivated by the theories of economist Milton Friedman. This approach resulted in a significant rise in interest rates, an impact that was felt not only in the U.S. but also worldwide. This era, referred to as the Volcker shock, spanned from 1979 until the summer of 1982. It was effective in curtailing inflation but also led to an increase in unemployment. Across the Atlantic in the United Kingdom, the Conservative Party, led by Margaret Thatcher, emerged victorious in the 1979 general election, taking over from the then-ruling Labour government headed by James Callaghan. Before Thatcher assumed office, the UK was battling severe inflation, which was consistently more than 10%, reaching 10.3% by the time of the election in May 1979. Thatcher confronted inflation directly by embracing monetarism, a policy aimed at regulating the supply of money. By 1983, she had succeeded in reducing inflation to 4.6%. However, this achievement was obtained at a significant cost. Unemployment in the UK escalated from 5.7% in 1979 to 12.2% by 1983, with a peak at 13% in 1982. Furthermore, the UK's economy contracted for 6 consecutive quarters beginning in the first quarter of 1980, signaling a severe recession. The dominance of monetarist thinking was short-lived. This approach, which central banks, including those in the United States from 1979 to 1982, once heavily relied on, centered on controlling the growth of the money supply in the economy. The idea was that this could be an effective way to manage the economy's overall performance, particularly inflation. But this depended on a consistent and predictable relationship between the amount of money circulating, the economy's output or nominal gross domestic product, and inflation. A key aspect of this was the velocity of money, or how quickly money moves through the economy, which initially seemed to increase steadily. However, by the 1980s and 1990s, the situation changed dramatically. The velocity of money became very unpredictable, leading to erratic changes. This unpredictability signaled a disconnect between the growth of the money supply and the overall economy's performance, challenging the reliability of monetarist strategies. As a result, the method that had attracted many economists in the 1970s was gradually abandoned due to its ineffectiveness. The root of the problem lay in shifts in the demand for money, which threw central banks into a quandary, pushing them to fundamentally reevaluate how monetary policy was formulated. By the early 1990s, a significant pivot occurred. Central banks began to directly target inflation and use short-term interest rate as their primary tool, moving away from their earlier focus on the growth of the money supply. This shift to a strategy emphasizing flexible inflation targeting has proven effective and is now widely adopted by major central banks around the world. Even though the approach called monetarism did not work out very well when put into practice, and the keen focus on monitoring money growth was a core part of monetarist thinking, is now dismissed by most economists, some ideas from monetarism have actually made their way into today's economic mainstream. One widely accepted idea is that it is crucial for the central bank to keep inflation under control. Additionally, it is acknowledged that both monetary policy and fiscal policy can influence economic output in the short term. This shows that despite its challenges, monetarist principles have blended into the more modern consensus in macroeconomics that came about in the 2000s. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.